Hello and welcome to Sansad TV. You're watching COVID-19 India Fights Back. I'm Tina Jha. The All India Institute of Medical Sciences and the Indian Council of Medical Research have issued new guidelines to identify COVID-19 treatment in the country. Based on 3 levels of seriousness, that is mild, moderate, and severe, the clinical guidance specifies which patients need which kind of medication, and also the do's and don'ts in a specific situation. Now, these revised guidelines have been put across at a time when India is going through a massive second wave of the pandemic. The second wave of the COVID-19 outbreak has been touching a new high in terms of daily new cases, overwhelming the health infrastructure in several states, and also leading to acute shortage of essential supplies like oxygen and drugs like remdesivir. So on this edition of India Fights Back, we will try and understand from experts what these guidelines are, the do's and don'ts as far as identification, recommendation, and treatment of COVID patients is concerned, and how effectively they are going to be implemented in different states so as to not just reduce the positivity rate, bring down the number of positive cases in the country, but also reduce panic among people. For this, I'm joined by 2 distinguished panelists on the program. Let me introduce them to you. I have with me Dr. Aparna Mukherjee, Scientist E, Clinical Trial and Health Systems Research Unit, ICMR, and Dr. Shashank Joshi, Member, COVID-19 Task Force, Maharashtra. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on the program today. Dr. Mukherjee, so I would like to begin the program today with you. Help us and our viewers understand what the new guidelines are. And also, if you could explain to us in brief some of the do's and don'ts that need to be followed for COVID-19 treatment in the country currently.
Yeah, so at the onset, I would like to say that this guidance has come as a joint effort of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, as well as a national task force for COVID, where ICMR has a role, as well as the joint monitoring group under the Directorate General of Health Sciences. So altogether, this just tries to rationalize the use of whatever therapy is available to us. So if we talk of the mild cases where the saturation is yet above 94, above 93 actually, that's 94 and above, where the patient can be kept in home isolation and can be taken care of at home. So here, there are certain care conditions which you need to do there, like it's very important that you monitor the temperature, the oxygen saturation, and you give supportive treatment in terms of paracetamol, hydration, and maintaining the nutrition, as well as you could give multivitamins. And if the saturation starts falling, you could even try the proning and then see if the saturation is going up. And this part of the monitoring is more important, and most of the cases would actually benefit from this part. So this is what we had tried to emphasize, and also maintain hand hygiene and distancing and masking when one of the person is infected and the other family members are not. So that also should be strictly followed. And some other options have also been given, but they really have low certainty of evidence. We just cannot say that these are the drugs of choice. But you could take ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or budesonide pumps. But these are just options, and they really don't have that much of evidence backing them. And once the admission is required, and then there is a column for admission, moderate disease and severe disease, which states which are the ones that can be given. So as of now, we really have evidence only for corticosteroids that it can reduce the progression and severity of the disease. Again, what we need to remember is that we cannot give corticosteroids very early. So people who are in home, not having any drop in their oxygen level, no breathlessness, it doesn't make any sense to give them steroids, and it may actually be harmful. And so be careful. It should always be taken only under the supervision of a medical practitioner. And as for the other drugs like convalescent plasma, remdesivir, again, there is a lot of conflicting evidence, and most of the evidence that we right now have say that remdesivir does not reduce the mortality of a person. That is, it does not help in preventing death or progression to severe disease. At the most, what it can do is reduce a few days of admission, few days of hospital stay. So if it's available, it can be used, but then clamoring for it that this is the life-saving drug is not the way to go.
Yeah,
I
unfortunately,
think that
that's
is
something
enough.
that
Yeah.
we've been seeing the scramble for remdesivir across the country, which has led to acute shortage in several states. So we'll come back to how these can be effectively implemented in states as far as COVID treatment is concerned. Dr. Joshi, let me get in you into the discussion, and let me have your thoughts put across to our viewers as to how the new protocol is different from what we have been following over the past year in terms of identification, recommendation, and treatment.
So I think the new protocol is very mindful of the level of evidence, and these are all, see, COVID is a new disease and these are all live documents. The first thing everybody needs to realize that 80% of COVID is asymptomatic and is going to get okay on its own. So most people don't need to panic, but there has to be a 14-day timetable where monitoring is required, which is what Dr. Mukherjee was alluding to, that she told us very clearly that we have to follow some basic protocols. And the simplest tool for that is to have a pulse oximeter. And on the oximeter, measure your saturation at rest and then do a 6-minute walk test and see the saturation. If there's a 3% drop or if it is below 93%, then you need to sound a red alert. The second thing is that these guidances clearly emphasize the role of what is working and what is not working, what is life-saving and what is not life-saving, because it is trying to triage, because our primary goal today in the second wave is to save lives. And in saving lives, we have to see what works to save lives. So as she rightly said, for mild disease, pretty much it's okay unless and until there is a lot of fever, hydration, and maybe an inhaled steroid. When it comes to moderate disease, then probably the only thing which works when your saturation drops below 93 is oxygen, which maintains, and with that give a prone position followed by a dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. That is what is recommended in the protocol. And if the patient is admitted, then probably we give a clot thinner called heparin. It's an injection of heparin which is given so that the blood clots are not formed. So that is what is given in the protocol. Many expensive drugs like remdesivir or a monoclonal antibody like tocilizumab or the much touted plasma, we have now evidence to show that plasma doesn't work except if it is given early in the first 5 days in high titers, which is very, very difficult to procure. So please don't go from pillar to post running behind plasma. And there is also a suggestion that it may breed a mutant strain. Second thing is this whole remdesivir craze. Remdesivir, as Madam rightfully said, only will improve clinical recovery, may reduce the stay in the hospital, and has no evidence to show. There are 4 large major RCTs, including the WHO, which India participated in a solidarity program, which showed that it doesn't do any benefit. So please don't clamor for it. What works is the injectable steroid of methylprednisolone or dexamethasone recommended in the protocol, or what works probably is oxygen, prone position, and the most important thing is COVID timetable is the right time, right monitoring, right drug. And most of these are very simple, they are inexpensive, and they are there in all hospitals, public and private both. So please don't rush, go to wherever you have a facility which has oxygen, which has steroids, which has a doctor. And therefore I always say that be connected digitally or telephonically with your doctor twice a day, measure your saturation, and when there is a red alert, try to go to the nearest facility which can give you some steroid and oxygen. And if needed, sometimes you might need some more advanced care. So that's the simplest way to put it. And I think this new protocol is a welcome change because it tries to simplify and makes a rational choice for treating doctors across India. And it allows a little flexibility. So it has allowed some flexibility in various stages of the disease. And our whole idea is focused to reduce the case fatality rate below 1%. And ideally, no one should succumb due to COVID. That is the whole idea of all these protocols being put in place.
But looking at the current situation, that looks like a big challenge. Coming to how we're going to implement these guidelines, Dr. Mukherjee, because what both of you are suggesting that people should not be running after these experimental drugs, these expensive ones like remdesivir. What's happening currently is that the doctors are prescribing at least 6 doses of remdesivir, and that's why people, the relatives of the victims, are running from pillar to post, scrabbling through social media, appealing for help and procuring these drugs at whatever cost. How are we going to ensure that the doctors do not prescribe it unless it's mandated, unless it's like very, very much required, or can also have alternate medication?
There's no alternate medication. As Dr. Joshi already pointed out, we only have evidence for oxygen. We only have evidence for corticosteroids, that's thioprid or dexamethasone. So as for these guidances, these are guidelines, okay? And I mean, it's very difficult to ensure that everybody is going to prescribe what is according to the guidelines. But once a clear guideline is out there and people can follow that, we are hoping that there will be less of confusion and physicians will stick to it, because everybody wants a direction and everybody wants something that they can prescribe and they can do to save their patients. So if the guidelines work, then that's good and good for them also.
Okay. Coming to how different the second wave is from the first wave that we witnessed last year, Dr. Joshi. Even last year, we witnessed significant rise in cases during a particular part of the year, but the number of hospitalizations back then weren't these many to overwhelm the system. But now what we are witnessing in several states, the high caseload states specifically, is that during the second wave, our health system is extremely overburdened. Is it because of the new variants of the virus, or is it because people were assured that we have actually won this fight against the pandemic?
So, Tinaji, that's a very good question. I think what started happening was in parts and geographies which were less exposed to the virus in the first wave, particularly in small hinterlands of regions of Maharashtra like Vidarbha, Marathwada, and some parts of Kerala. There were Gram Panchayat elections. And during that time, there was zero adherence to COVID appropriate behavior. People thought COVID is over. And probably there we saw accidentally in cities like Amravati, a test positivity rate of 50%. And that laid a needled out a suspicion that probably there was a variant of concern or the mutants which are now being touted. But first of all, see, every virus will mutate, like a flu virus also mutates. And from there, what we observed in the last year, if in a family of 10, one person got infected, he would transmit the infection to maybe another 2 or 3 people in the house. This time what we have observed is that if one person got infected, the entire family of 10 got infected. So there was a cluster spreading in those colonies, in those places of Akola, Yavatmal, and various other places. And some of those samples were sent to BJ Medical College and then to NIV at ICMR, as well as to NCCS, as well as the Institute of Genomics in New Delhi. And they found that there were some variants of concerns, and that is now in little public domain. What is happening in the current wave is different from last year are 3 things. Number one, it's a fast spreading strain, but it's also a very fast recovering strain. So that's very, very important, and it is a low case fatality rate. Everybody gets scared with that word mutant. It's not some deformed virus or something, and it's very scary. No, it's not. Probably the virus may be a little less of this current thing because the recovery is fast and the case fatality rate is fast, but it is transmitting very fast. So more people are getting affected. That's the first thing. Second is we saw a younger generation, which are people between 20s and 40s, they got afflicted, and even children got afflicted. Thirdly, we saw little atypical features. In the last wave, we didn't see people running fever, running persistent cough, and lack of smell and taste. So clinically, we saw in a gut manifestations, heart manifestations, we saw clinically a little different phenotype, And what happened is that nobody expected a tsunami or a geometric progression. You see, 1:3 and 1:10, there's a big difference, and that number sheerly overwhelmed us. Unfortunately, the spread had nothing to do with the variant of concern. It was zero discipline and total lack of adherence to masking, double masking, distancing, sanitization. And this is something which we have to still do. Whether you vaccinate or not, whether you have COVID or not, whether you have antibody or not, you still need to follow COVID appropriate behavior. That's number one. Number two, it was a faster spreading strain. No question asked about it. It's a very fast transmitting strain. And the same thing happened in Punjab and New Delhi. They saw a British variant there. But don't get scared. There's a Bengal variant or a UK variant or a Maharashtra variant. There's nothing like that. Every virus will mutate. But even if it mutates, we have to see that from that, we have to be alert. But when suddenly instead of 3 people, the system has to see 10 people. And when you multiply it with the geography and the size of the population, then it becomes a challenge. Another thing which we saw, in the first wave we saw in Mumbai, which is a very densely populated place. Okay, slums like Dharavi exploded. And now they have got a little bit of herd immunity. Now, even today in this full pandemic, we see only 100 cases. But the middle class and the new rich class, which were less exposed in the first wave, they are the ones who got it. And that's why the whole private infrastructure got crumbled. We still have beds in the public hospitals of Mumbai city. So that change of demographic also was very important, that a less exposed population got exposed. So the second wave is manageable, but the tsunami-like numbers strained the healthcare infrastructure. And this was probably initially thought it's just a Maharashtra phenomenon, but that's not true. Because, viral replication and transmission, it's out in the community. So now I can say with certainty that there's community transmission. It has spread in the community. It has gone across the nation. And unfortunately, we need to break this chain of transmission. And except probably masking, double masking, we really can't break it. But I'm very optimistic. We're already seeing a little plateauing. If you see the last whole week's numbers, week after week, our test positivity rate from Mumbai has dropped down from 28% now to around 15%. So we are seeing signs of hope. Every wave which goes up will come down. But because of the sheer numbers, we were overwhelmed. But I'm certain that we'll come out of it.
But nationally, the trend has been very alarming, Dr. Mukherjee, because the average positivity rate in India has now gone from just about 4.2% a month ago to 18.4%. And this is on the 22nd of April. So that certainly is an alarming trend. But the big question is, how do we come out of this grave situation? By when can we expect the plateauing of cases in India?
Right. Like Dr. Joshi said, yes, it started in Maharashtra, but now it's all across India that we are seeing this explosion. And it's very difficult to predict when we can come out, but the only way out of it is to break the chain of transmission. And that can be done only if we maintain our COVID appropriate behaviors very, very strictly. It doesn't matter whether we are really going out for a few minutes or, we can just think that it's just a few minutes and I'll just have something and come back. But it cannot happen like that. I know it's difficult. I know it's a lot of hardship for everyone. But then if you really want to break this chain, then you have to maintain these COVID appropriate behaviors, and it has to come from within us itself. If every one of us participate in maintaining this, and then we will be successful in this. And obviously vaccination, that is another the weapon that we have. And the good news is that the vaccines that we are using here, both of them actually have shown to be effective against whatever mutant and variants that is circulating. So that's a good news actually. But again, it does not mean that if you've got vaccinated and whether you have COVID in the first wave, then you are, totally immune. So you need to take all the precautions even then. So that's the only way, because for a disease where there is not much treatment available, so the only way is to stop it from happening. And that now we need to take that responsibility in our own hands and do that.
Absolutely. Dr. Joshi, one thing that has also come across, and that could be some good news in this grave situation that we are in, Zydus Cadila has received emergency use approval for use of one of its hepatitis C drug, which is called Virafin, to treat also the cases of COVID. So what kind of patients can be given this drug? Those who have mild symptoms or those with severe symptoms can be treated with this drug?
So, Tina ji, this is a drug called pegylated interferon. Our body, whenever we get viral infection, makes interferons and clears all viral infections, whether it's acute or chronic. And pegylation is a chemical process which prolongs the action of the drug. So this is a injection which we can give, which will take care of moderate COVID, not mild COVID, not severe COVID. It can be given. This was a phase 3 trial done. I was the chairman of the Data Safety Monitoring Board. It's an investigational experimental agent. It is something which will prevent which will clear the virus faster. There is some basis, biological basis to it. There are lots such experimental therapies, and all these therapies in times of crisis are welcome. Most of these therapies, I must remind everybody, are in research mode and they are in emergency use authorization, and more data will emerge as the therapy will be used. But of course, having some additional tools like this, particularly when there are acute shortages of other compounds like say tocilizumab or itolizumab, is a welcome change because there is a cytokine storm. See, the first 1 week of the virus is multiplying very actively, and we don't have very good drugs to really reduce that multiplication. In the second week, what's happening is the immune system takes over, and there's a lot of inflammatory products, chemicals which are poured out, and that is normally cleared by our own body's interferons. That is being given as an injection in moderate disease. So it's a welcome change. It's an additional armamentarium which has got an emergency use authorization, and I'm certain more data will be generated and we'll have many more tools which will be available. It's also time that most of COVID is in research mode. The therapeutics is in research mode, as Dr. Mukherjee was alluding to. The quality of evidence, the level of evidence will emerge. But it's a welcome thing that we have another one medication which is available. It's make in India, made in India. The medication is affordable and accessible, and therefore some more options are available to the treating clinicians who are finding it a little difficult in these difficult times. And in moderate disease, if we use it, the need for oxygen comes down. See, currently also we are facing an oxygen shortage. So probably the Drug Control General has fast-tracked many such molecules, because if you use many of these molecules, and many of them are, they are called repurposed drugs. That means their indication is for something else. This was like a hepatitis C injection, but now it is being used for COVID. Similarly, the tocilizumab was a rheumatoid arthritis drug. The itolizumab is a psoriasis drug. So many of these are repurposed so that we can reduce that inflammatory cytokine storm, which is called as a lung storm, and probably reduce the need for oxygen, because you see many of these patients need sometimes 60 liters of oxygen, and oxygen is in short supply. So if we give these medications early, the wish is that not only we can save lives, and we need data to generate on that, but we can also reduce the oxygen need to 4 liters or 8 liters. So in their pivotal trial, which they did phase 2 and phase 3, they were able to reduce the oxygen need, and probably that is why an emergency use authorization was recommended by the subject expert committee.
Okay, let's hope that it's very, very effective in bringing down the viral load as far as COVID cases are concerned in the country, because time demands such an additional factor to be that has been approved. But one final question from you, Dr. Mukherjee. The guidelines by the ICMR and AIIMS talk about the mild, moderate, and severe patients of COVID-19. But another question that a lot of people have been asking is, what about those who have been exposed to this virus, who are living within the family but have tested negative, but have been exposed to the virus? Is there any protocol that they need to follow, any kind of medication that can prevent them from being infected? What is it that they must do?
As of now, we are advising all kinds of, contact and droplet precautions. That is like masking and physical distancing and strict hand hygiene. As of now, that's what they need to follow strictly.
I think because the larger worry is, we've been talking about how these new variants are very, very transmittive, and that's why people are scared. Even when patients develop mild symptoms, they prefer to not risk the lives of their family members, and they prefer to go to hospitals and get themselves admitted. So fairly so, because nobody wants to risk their lives and of their families. And that is perhaps is putting this pressure on our healthcare system. So any kind of medication that you would, that the ICMR would suggest, or the protocol for normal people who haven't tested positive but have been exposed to the virus, apart from masking and apart from COVID appropriate behavior? Because a lot of people, I think, are self-prescribing medication as well.
Yes, they are, as you all are aware of. But right now, as far as this guidance goes and this NTF suggests, we do not actually give, we are not actually suggesting any prophylactic medicine as such.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dr. Joshi, would you like to add something on the kind of precautions that people must take while they're at home in the presence of COVID-infected patients?
So we had to strategize this. So I think this is not a domain of actually task force recommendation. But what we did in the city of Mumbai was that if one person got infected, that's the index case, then we isolated that case and moved them to a center, may not be a hospital, a corona care center or even a hotel, because many of the affording people wanted, but we didn't want to block a hospital bed, and they were digitally connected with their doctor. And the people who were residing at their residence were also connected to a healthcare provider. There is no treatment recommended, but they were isolated and they were observed and tested after 5 days or 7 days, so that they need, because we need to do contact tracing. So they are directly high risk contacts at home who were exposed to this individual. And obviously they were looked after at home, no current, but they were told to have hydration, have better ventilation at home. But because the rapidity of spread and clustering, what we did is we took out the index case and put them into a facility where they were looked after, so that there was no stress on the family, and the rest of the family was isolated as well and monitored for a week so that they could self-test. And if they tested positive, again appropriate care had to be taken. That's the only way out for this. And this is happening all across India. So we have to be mindful that we can't block a hospital bed for this. At the same time, we cannot stop care. So people who are not infected also have to be cared, isolated, and they have to look after themselves. So many of them, even in their own houses, may have to mask, and that's something, and they have to self-isolate and they have to stay on their own. At the same time, people who could afford a hotel, they could go to a hotel. People who could not, they went to these corona care centers, or we have the jumbo facilities in Mumbai city where they went and they were observed. So this is what we had to do. This is a situation, it's like a war-like emergency, because the second wave has hit us hard. We had a similar experience 100 years back with Spanish flu. And I'm reasonably certain that Indians are resilient. We have the ability to fight back. And I think if we are able to triage, so what we are doing is we assess the patient, then we triage or transfer the patient, and then we manage them appropriately. So if they are not infected, please don't self-prescribe drugs and start medications on their own. Actually, it will lead to more complications, because what happens with them, and we have seen this, that they will self-treat and the test will come negative, and then they are actually having the virus, and they will probably deteriorate after a week or 15 days, and then they will land up in the hospital. So we want to avoid all those things. Please be connected to your doctor, and that doctor, even if it is digital, try to take appropriate care under medical supervision is the only request I have.
Absolutely. I think perhaps going forward in the kind of situation we are in, this is the appropriate strategy to reduce panic among people, apart from strengthening our treatment processes and following the effective guidelines that have been prescribed by ICMR and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. What the need of the hour is to reduce the panic among people, among the larger population in affected states like Maharashtra, Delhi, Punjab, Chhattisgarh, and also Gujarat. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of India Fights Back. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on the program and putting forth your perspective, sharing it with us and our viewers. Pleasure having you on the program today. So that's it from us on this edition of India Fights Back. But before I leave, I once again want to make an appeal to all our viewers. Both our panelists have said it again and again, and I want to reiterate, please maintain COVID-appropriate behavior. If you can, stay at home, but if you have to step outside, don't forget to put on your masks. If possible, double mask yourselves, maintain physical distancing, and try and keep sanitizing or washing your hands regularly. So take care of yourselves and your families. These are tough times, but as Dr. Joshi said, Indians are resilient. We will fight back, and normalcy will be restored in the country very soon. So take care of yourselves and your families, and thank you very much once again for your time.